In this video, I want to show you failed prophecy gone bad. This is from the Great Controversy, where Ellen White is saying here, where concerning the 2,300 days of Daniel 8:14, how they terminated in 1844, and there began an investigative judgment for those who entitled such benefits. So she is saying here that Jesus did not start his atoning work until 1844. Now the question is, where was he at for some 1,800 years? When we know that he completed his work of redemption at Calvary and all the atoning that needed to be done was done then. But yet Ellen White is saying, no, he didn't enter heaven until 1844 to begin his work of investigative judgment. And she goes on to say in the Great Controversy again, on page 485, the work of investigative judgment and the blotting out of sin is to be accompanied before the second advent of the Lord. So again, she is referring to Jesus beginning his work of atonement in 1844, something that the Bible clearly doesn't teach. It comes from a wrong interpretation of Scripture. It is exactly where that comes from. For the next screenshots, let me supply you with some background work you're going to need. Remember, Jesus did not come back as Ellen White and William Miller predicted in 1844. And so there's this big misunderstanding or this big disappointment. Why didn't he come back? And they were all anticipating this. So Bates came up with the idea that because blood was sprinkled on the altar 7 times on the Day of Atonement, that it must mean that Jesus is going to come back 7 years, 1 year for each time blood was sprinkled on the altar, which we know is ridiculous. But anyway, that is why there became a tarrying time now. 1844, 7 years later, will be 1851. During this period is what they call the tarrying time, when they're being tested to see whether or not they follow the fourth commandment. And in that background, in April of 1850, in Present Truth, Volume 1, Number 9, and Present Truth was the editor then, was James White. Ellen White says the mighty shaking has commenced. This again is in a reference to what she thought was the soon coming of Jesus Christ. She is well aware that the prediction is now Jesus returning in 1851, and that is why in April of 1850, in Present Truth, she says that the shaking has commenced. And this carries us up to July the 27th of 1850, when they begin talking about the mark of the beast in Testimonies Volume 1. And remember, they taught that the mark of the beast was Sunday keeping. If you worshipped on Sunday, you received the mark of the beast. When everyone who knows the Bible knows that the mark of the beast is a number of a man and not the day of a week. But anyway, they are referring to the coming of Christ again, in which Ellen White will go on to say, this is where she gets the statement, get ready. What we've had years to learn, we've only a few months to learn now. Why? Again, because remember the tarrying time. They've extended the return of Christ up until 1851, and according to them, it'd be October 22nd of 1851. So they've extended this tarrying time out to 1851. And so in July 27th of 1850 is why she can say, get ready. What we've taken years to learn, we've only got a few months now, because she's fully anticipating the return of Christ in 1851. And of course we know that Jesus didn't come back in 1851 either, did we? But Ellen White wasn't through with her date setting. In a conference meeting in May in Battle Creek, Michigan, in 1856, she makes this statement to the people there at the conference. I saw that the company president at the conference said some were food for worms. And at the end she says some will be subjects of the 7 last plagues, and some will be alive and remain upon the earth to be translated at the coming of Jesus. So there she is predicting the return of Christ as late as 1856. Now we know that everyone who was at that conference in 1856 is gone and dead by now. So again, there's another failed prediction on the return of Christ by Ellen White. Now naturally, the Seventh-day Adventists try to cover this up, and following all these predictions, they're faced with this big dilemma. How are they going to cover up all these failed predictions of Ellen White. What they begin to do now is say, well, no, the people weren't giving enough tithe, the people weren't loyal enough to God, they weren't doing this, they weren't doing that, so it's the people's fault that God didn't come back. They had not repented, they had not turned to Him, and it's God's fault that He didn't come back. Do you think that God is going to give someone false prophecy about His return in 1856, and just because people were disobedient, He's going to change His mind and not come back? See, this is how they try to cover things up. They just try to explain them away. See, the problem is they could still have been a denomination had they just dropped the false prophecies of Ellen White. But it's become so obsessed now, and sinfully proud people would not let it drop. So over the last 100 years or so, all they've been is just one big cover-up after another for the failed predictions of Ellen White. And I doubt very seriously if Seventh-day Adventists read these things. I doubt very seriously if they search these books to find out what Ellen White says. They want you to give everything, but yet when you ask them for sources, like one SDA member says, do your own research. I'm not going to do your research for you. So here it is. This is the cover-up and the failed predictions of Ellen White, showing clearly that this lady was a false prophet. Until next time, this has been Golly saying, God bless.